I just felt these overwhelming emotions and I didn't know what to do with them. I wanted to escape my body. Like, have you ever felt that way where you're just like, I want to escape my body? Like, I feel so uncomfortable right now with all these emotions. If I could just like crawl out of my skin, I would right now. That's exactly how I felt. Hello, my beautiful muses, and welcome back to this week's episode. I'm so excited you're here. And if you've missed last week's episode, go watch it. I had my fiance TJ on the podcast and on YouTube, and we just went into how we navigate challenges as a couple and things we've learned so far, and just what's brought us closer into our intimacy and our connection. It was such a powerful conversation, which really led me to just want to be more intimate, more connected with you guys. And I realized I had not talked about my story in a while, and I won't bore you with all the details of my adolescence and my childhood and what got me to this point, but I do want to dabble in that a little bit because there are reasons that I went through the things that I went through, and they weren't just for me to grow and be this person that I am today. It's definitely to help other people in their journey. But I want to go back to even 6 years ago, if I'm doing my math right, like 2018, end of 2018, 2019. So before COVID hit, before any of that. And even years prior to that, I was so miserable. I was so unhappy. I was living with so much anxiety, so much depression, so much victimhood in my life. I felt like no one cared for me. I felt so alone. I felt like the world was against me. I was always too late to anything and everything. I sucked. I was not worthy of love. I felt all these things to my core, even if I didn't feel it every day or I didn't acknowledge those feelings every day. I did feel it in my core. I felt it in my essence. Those were all my truths. That was the story that I was living on and based on. And so when I look back at this time and my evolution here from that time to now, 6 years, I remember that there was just one pivotal moment where I just got sick of my own shit. That's literally what happened. I got sick of being sick. I got sick of feeling like crap. I got sick of feeling alone. I got sick of feeling like I was a victim. I got sick of being unhappy in my marriage at the time. I was sick of being unhappy in my business, in whatever I wanted to create. I was sick of all of it. And I realized like there's just one common denominator in all of these things that are making me so unhappy, and that was myself. And so I started in this like self-help journey. But I want to start off with 6 years ago and how I felt, because I think a lot of us are stuck there right now, and a lot of us are feeling this way, and we don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. We don't think things get better. We don't know how people go from A to Z. You see people on social media, you see my life, and you think, well, she's probably like so happy, and she has emotional mastery, and she's so calm. She has a healthy, happy relationship. She communicates well with others, and all these things are true now in my life, but only because I've put in the practice, the time, and really getting to know myself. Honestly, like self-mastery, becoming your own muse, these things that I use, these words that I use are not just like fun words I feel like are thrown out there. When I say, hey, my muses, hey, muse, I am speaking to you because you have the ability to become your own source of inspiration. You have the ability to become the one thing that you look back at and you say, wow, I am inspired by myself. I am motivated by myself. Or you can look back at yourself and still live in that like sadness and that story and that victimhood. And so when I look back, I was so much in my victimhood, and maybe you are right now. You're listening to this and you're like, well, yes, my relationship sucks. My boyfriend's not doing what I want him to do. My work is not how I want it to be. My boss sucks. Maybe your career sucks. Maybe everything's falling apart. Maybe it's multiple things that are falling apart. And you're living in this perpetual victimhood. And the reason we get there, the reason I was there, was because it was easier. And I'm going to be completely honest and transparent in this video. And I hope it helps you see parts of yourself that maybe you're missing, because I missed this part for a long time. It was easier for me to stay in my victimhood, blame other people, exterior things happening to me, than to look inside. And the reason that was easier was because I was scared. Like deep down, there was just fear in me that if I looked inside, if I looked at my past, if I looked at my traumas or my triggers, when I started learning what these words even meant 6 years ago, I was like, what's going to happen? What am I going to find there? Maybe I'm broken. Maybe there's something really wrong with me. And I remember there was times, this was probably like 2017, so like more than 7 years ago. And I drank a lot. Specifically, I had a fight with my ex-husband at the time, because at the time he was my only source of happiness. And so if we weren't doing well, my world was chaos. My inner world was chaos. My emotions were chaos. I felt so overwhelmed with emotions and things coming up for me. And at the time, I didn't recognize that those emotions that were coming up for me when fights with him were happening were traumas and triggers from my childhood and the ways that I didn't receive love. And so I don't even know that my ex-husband was married to an adult. So I think he was married to different stages of me, as a child and mostly as an adolescent. Like him and I just like went at it and we would fight like ugly and viciously. And I remember always just like being mean and bullying him back because I thought that he was just so mean with his words. So I had to like one up him and do something even more mean. And he was married to an adolescent version of me, right? That was not healed, that was not seen, that was not validated, that was not loved properly. And so when these emotions would rise up for me, I just felt these overwhelming emotions and I didn't know what to do with them. I wanted to escape my body. Like, have you ever felt that way where you're just like, I want to escape my body? Like, I feel so uncomfortable right now with all these emotions. If I could just like crawl out of my skin, I would right now. That's exactly how I felt, especially when we got into fights. And so I didn't have tools, I didn't have techniques. I didn't even go to therapy at that time. I had nothing. And so what I would do was drink because at the time I had realized that if I drank, I didn't feel it. I didn't care. I numbed. And so I would drink. I would drink so heavily. And I don't think I've ever even said this out loud, like on a social platform, but I drink so heavily. Like I would drink like almost straight vodka and just like lemon and soda water in bed, sad, depressed, as we fought and we didn't speak all day. Like we would get into arguments and we wouldn't speak all day. And I was so sad. And I remember always thinking, and even having suicidal thoughts. I'll be completely honest and transparent here. And so if you're struggling with mental health, this is real. Like depression is real, anxiety is real. I know it because I've been there and I felt it. I felt the worst amount of pain because I didn't want to look beyond what I was looking at and look deeper within myself. And I remember having suicidal thoughts. It was one time that we were in a fight. And at the time, too, I had like issues with my sister. And she said she wasn't going to go to my wedding and all these things. So, like, at that point, I felt like the whole world was against me. Like, everyone just didn't love me. No one cared for me. And I started just looking for evidence of that. When I was depressed, I remember like just drinking and being like, no one cares for me. No one loves me. And just finding all this evidence because at the time I could find some. I could literally find some. And if I look back to my childhood, like my mom wasn't there for me the way I needed to. She was very emotionally abusive, narcissistic, all these big words that we throw around so often. But when you grow up with a parent that's that way, you learn to survive no matter what. And so I didn't realize that my survival mode meant that I just like shunned all my emotions and all my feelings for so long. And so in my marriage, all those came up. In my marriage, I still felt alone like I did as a child, as a teenager. I felt all those triggers come up for me, but I had no idea or even enough self-awareness to place them where they needed to be or have enough love and compassion for myself. If I'm being honest with myself, I didn't have enough love and compassion. I really expected my husband at the time to have that love and compassion for me. But of course, he was dealing with his own traumas and triggers because we don't marry people better than us or worse than us. We marry our mirror and our reflection of who we are at the time. And so he was dealing with his own stuff. And on textbook, sure, he was narcissistic, but so was I in some way. We all are. I think that word gets used a lot, and I will say that about being narcissistic, and I think it gets used a lot towards men because men are really good at avoiding emotions and just kind of like stonewalling you and pushing you over there. But to their core, narcissists are just people that were never heard or validated, and they had to find ways to feel that love and validation. So they'll gaslight, they'll say things that are mean, they'll trigger you, they'll try to get some sort of emotion out of you because that's the only way that they received love growing up. And if we're all being honest with ourselves, we've all done that in some scenario in our life. So to some degree, we could all be called narcissist. And that's probably going to ruffle a lot of feathers because I think that word just gets thrown a lot now in this like victimhood feeling of like, he's a narcissist, she's a narcissist, he's a narcissist, blah, 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 blah. But we're all capable of being narcissistic because narcissists at their core, all they're trying to do is self-preserve, self-protect. And I remember even getting a divorce and like that coming up a lot, like where I had girlfriends saying, he was a narcissist, he was a narcissist. And I started thinking, I don't want to call him that. I don't want to call him that because I am in my own journey of knowing myself, getting better. And if he was a narcissist, that must have meant that I loved one and I was there for the narcissist for a long time. And I was playing in that same game. So what does that mean about me? And that's when I really started thinking like, okay, if I'm the common denominator in all these scenarios, like where can I do better? How can I be better? And so I'll give you a little background of me if you don't know much about my childhood. It was very messy, very not good. And on textbook childhood, I should be like into drugs or probably like a little crazy. My mom was never very nurturing or loving. She was a single mom most of the time because my dad was a drug dealer, and I grew up in Miami. So in the 80s, he came from Cuba and he was a drug dealer. So he was in and out of my life, and he only was really in my life if my mom can get money from him. So she was super materialistic in that way. And also she wanted to protect me, I'm sure, from his job and his work. And so I didn't see my dad a lot. But I do remember them constantly getting into fights like, if you don't give me money, you can't see her. If you don't give me money, you can't see her. And I became this thing. And I remember always feeling as a child like, well, my dad's not giving us money, so he doesn't care about me. So I must not be worthy of even being seen because he doesn't want to give me money, which gave me a whole slew of issues with money that I'll talk about eventually on here. But connecting those dots has been pretty amazing. Anyways, I don't want to sidetrack too much. My mom was very emotionally unavailable and emotionally abusive and very controlling and manipulative. And so she would always lie, and she would say things, and she would lie to people, and she always expected me to be perfect, but she obviously didn't uphold the same level of integrity that she expected from me. She had a very terrible relationship with my 2 older sisters, which she then had with me. And so as I grew up and I became a teenager, I started realizing that my mom was not the victim of life and that everyone wasn't against her. There was really like her, right? I was like, wait, there's something wrong here. Like, it's not my dad. It's not your friend. It's not my sisters. It's not your job. It's not all these things. That's who I grew up with. It was everyone else's fault but hers. And as I grew up, I was like, no, I think it might be some of you, Mom. Like, I think there's something wrong there. But when you grow up with somebody that's so controlling and so abusive, you don't have a voice. You don't have opportunity to learn who you are, to create who you are, to learn more about yourself. I became her mother in some way. I had to mother my mother. And that could be very distressful. It's one of the reasons that I don't want children of my own is because so much of my childhood, I felt like I had to mother already. I did a lot of mothering. And so now that I'm an adult and I get to just give all this attention and love to myself, I want to be selfish for that reason. And then my father passed away when I was 19. He had multiple strokes that led to his death. And he did apologize to me on his deathbed, which was very traumatic for me at the time, especially because I didn't really have a relationship with him. I think I might have been 18, actually. And I remember him not being able to speak completely. He was like paralyzed from the left side of his mouth. And he was just apologizing to me for not being there, not being the father that he should have been. It makes me emotional to even talk about this because I could see how much pain he had and how much regret he had in his life at the end of his life. He was older than my mom, so he was like 70 something when he passed away. And he had me in his 50s. He was way older. And I remember seeing him in so much pain, emotional pain. And that brought up so much emotions for me, so many feelings. And I remember my mom shedding those emotions and asking me, like, why are you crying? Why do you care about what your dad, said to you? Why do you even care? He never cared about you. He never shut up for you. He never was there for you. He never did anything for you. Why do you care? Stop crying. And that's like the first vivid memory that I have of my mom clearly shutting down any emotions that made her uncomfortable that had to do with somebody that she probably had some resentment and anger towards. And so, of course, she did that growing up, I'm sure plenty. And I remember her saying, I'll give you something to cry about when I was little, and little things that would come up when I would get emotional. And so what I was being taught at that time as a child and even as a teenager experiencing this enormous grief from my dad, and not only grieving the fact that he's dead, but grieving the relationship that we would never have, that I had to just shun my emotions and block them. And I was made to feel shame and guilt for even feeling sadness. And so that started a whole slew of me just suppressing my emotions. But it also completely destroyed my relationship with my mother. And so I was 19. I decided to leave. I had a boyfriend at the time. He was a football player and he had a college scholarship to go play football somewhere. And I just followed him. I honestly would have followed a blind horse out of Miami. I just wanted to get away from my mother as fast as I could because I was so unhappy and so miserable. And so as I went off on my own at 19, I still helped out my mom monetarily and helped her. I would still stay in contact with her because I felt bad. I felt so guilty. And then those emotions started coming up. It's I felt shame and guilt. She made sure to help make me feel that way. She was like, I can't believe you abandoned me. I can't believe you left me. Of course, in essence, now I look back and my mom had a lot of trauma, a lot of her own pain. She wasn't raised by her own mother. She had her own issues. But at the time, I didn't feel like that. I felt like, you're my mother. You're supposed to help me. You're supposed to be here for me. And you're doing the complete opposite. You're dragging me down. You're hurting me. You're calling me names. You're saying bad, terrible things about me. You're making me feel shame and guilt. This doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel aligned. This doesn't feel like a mother-daughter relationship. And so there was this breaking point. And I will say this, because a lot of women, especially, we get shamed for not having a relationship with their mothers because we are told like that's your mother and she gave birth to you. And listen, I would want nothing more than to have a beautiful relationship with my mom, or at the very least a decent one where I can just contact her here and there and talk to her. But she's the type of negative person that will consume everything. She doesn't know how to have a healthy relationship at all, and she only knows how to bring people down. And she became kind of like a cancer in my life. And I hate to use that word to describe my mom, but that's what she became. And my last breaking point was when she decided to go on this little TV show called Despierta America, which is Good Morning America in Spanish in like the Latin community world. We grew up in Miami, and a hairdresser there, I guess, was giving away a free makeover. And so I'm night 20 at that point, I think 20, 21 maybe. Yeah, I was probably like 21, 22 actually. I was bartending, I was making good money, so I would send her a few $100s to help her out. Like I was sending her money while I lived by myself. At the time, me and my ex had broken up, so I was living by myself as a 20-year-old in Kansas City, just trying to make it out on my own. And just like, I promised myself when I would leave my mom, I'm never feeling instability again. We had a lot of instability where when I was growing up, we moved around a lot. I never had like a steady home. We never had that stable like feeling, right? And so she gets on this TV show and she goes on to saying that all three of her daughters abandoned her, and then she ended up homeless and she ended up just alone, and that, you know, this show has helped her and that makeover is helping her. And so she just went on there talking terrible things about the three of us. And I can't speak for my sisters. I know that they've tried to have a healthy relationship with my mother at some point and they have their own stories. I'm only going to speak about mine. I had just sent her money and just talked to her like 2 days before that show. And so to me, that was like a dagger in the heart. Like I almost felt like an out-of-body experience to even believe that my own mother would do something like that and would not think that that's wrong. And so I had to make a really big choice at that point. I had to decide that I could no longer have this person in my life because it was hurting me so much. It was hurting me to a bigger degree. It was bringing so much negativity in my life. It was bringing me down as a human. And at that time, I still had no self-awareness about my emotions and like what I really needed to give to myself, except that I knew I had to get rid of that. And so fast forward, I think that was like 21 or so. I meet my ex-husband at 23. And so if I look back and thinking of all this, that was all just like this big repression of emotions, this overwhelm, this trauma that I experienced between my father dying, my mom leaving my mother, going off on my own, my mother doing the things that she did after I left. And then I go and I jump into a full marriage. Like I met my ex-husband and we eloped and we got married within like 8 months. And so I never knew like what a healthy relationship or marriage would look like or anything. So looking back, I had so little self-awareness and so little self-love and so little understanding of myself, like most of us do in our 20s. And if you're in your 20s and you're listening to this, it's okay. This is the time that you need to actually like go in deep and discover yourself. And if you find yourself always constantly needing attention and going out and doing things and being around people, that's probably a sign that you need to do the opposite. Like your 20s are the most beautiful years for you to understand and get to know yourself and understand what you truly want and who you truly are. And I robbed myself of that. But then in some way, like my marriage at the time gave me a beautiful way of understanding myself on a deeper level. Even though I didn't know at the time, it came later. And so I started going to therapy because I was so unhappy with my marriage. Started going to therapy around 2018, end of 2018. And I remember asking him to go to therapy with me and he wouldn't. And so I started going to therapy, and I remember my first session, I thought I was there to talk about my marriage and how terrible it was and how unhappy I was. And she started opening up all those suppressed and repressed emotions that I had. And I felt like Pandora's box had been like broken loose. I don't remember crying. Now I cry often because it's a great release of emotions, but I don't remember till that point crying as much as I did in that session and after that session. It was like she opened up parts of me that weren't seen. It was like she unveiled so many things. And really all she did was just like put them in the light. She was just like, let's talk about your childhood. Let's talk about your upbringing. Let's talk about these things. And so every session just kind of got a little more intense and we brought all these things up to surface. And I remember thinking, okay, what do I do with all these pieces now? Like I see them, I see all the broken pieces, but what do I do with them? And this is where I think talk therapy is good, but to a certain degree. When our emotions and our feelings and our bodies hold so much trauma and triggers and repressed emotions, you can talk about them and you can psychologically analyze them and you can logically analyze them, but you can't feel through them if you're just talking about them. And so I think talk therapy works to a certain extent, but then you need to do something to help things move and help things grow and help things shift. And I didn't know that at the time. So I did therapy for about a year, and that kind of like shifted the way that I felt about my marriage. And so my marriage ended in 2020. But instead of just going inwards with myself, my MO was always to just be in relationships. I find safety and love and connection in being in a relationship. It's been like my goal in life has been to have a loving, caring connection with somebody. Possibly, and most likely because I never had that with my mother or my father or with anyone. And so being married is something that I've always wanted. I've always wanted to actually be with somebody. I never really cared to have kids, but I always did want that connection with somebody. And so instead of going inward, like that was the perfect opportunity. Like, bam, this big life event. When tragedy happens, when things shift, like my dad passing away and stuff, like whenever big things happen like this for you or for me or for anyone, like that's the time that we go and we move and we do things and we shift our lives. But I decided not to do that. And I just jumped right into another relationship. And in hindsight, I was very annoyed that I did that. I think even at the time I was like, why am I doing this again? But relationships are your best and biggest mirrors. Like we avoid them sometimes, or we think we don't want to be in a relationship. And that's because it takes a whole level of consciousness to be with another person. And that relationship taught me a lot. We started going to therapy because I said to him, I will not be in another relationship with somebody that doesn't have some self-awareness and understands themselves. So I need you to go to therapy with me. And so we started going to couples therapy, and I learned so much of myself and how I showed up in relationships, how much my traumas from childhood were coming up, how I had behaviors that were just like needing validation and attention and not genuine, right? The ways I acted weren't coming from alignment and love, they were and peace and calmness. They were coming from needing attention and validation and finding very manipulative ways to get those things. We all find ways to get what we want and what we need as humans, but most of the time they're not very healthy ways that we find to do these things. And so I started finding all these parts of myself. And so within those 2 years, I was with this next person. So I was married and together with my ex-husband for 7. Then I got into a 2-year relationship. But in those 2 years, we went to 2 different relationship therapists. I had already gone to a therapist before. I realized that I was bringing up all these things, and I started getting very depressed because I didn't know what to do. I was like, okay, great. I keep finding out these parts of me, but what do I do with them? And so then I went into hypnotherapy. And I started really rewiring my subconscious, and that took me into a whirlwind of depression. At the time, I didn't realize and understand nervous system work. I didn't understand how our brains operate. I didn't understand how emotions worked. I didn't understand any of this. I just understood I didn't feel good, and I had to find people that made me feel better. But what happens is that our nervous system can snap. And what I was doing is that I was overloading myself with so much, and I was bringing up so much trauma. And in the type A, ambitious woman's way that I am, I wanted to get it all done as fast and quickly as possible. Like I remember thinking like, okay, well, if I go to hypnotherapy and then I do this thing, and then I'll be good, and I'll be fine, and I'll be happy. That's not how it worked. That's not how it worked at all. I'll give you the shortcut. It didn't work that way. And in my second relationship now, I'm feeling a lot of the same ways that I did in my marriage. I felt sad, I felt depressed, but now I had a lot of awareness to all these broken parts of me, but I had nowhere to put it. And so hypnotherapy did start helping me rewire my subconscious. And that's some of the work that I do with my clients as well now, because I learned how to do that in a way that feels calming and good to people, and that you could do it without having to snap. You don't have to do everything at once and snap. Like your growth journey and your healing is a journey. It's the reason for the name of my podcast, You First, A Journey to Self, because it's always a journey to self, and you always come first, right? You first, everyone else second. And as I started going to hypnotherapy, I rewired a lot of those self-beliefs I had, the limiting self-beliefs, the hurt, the pain. I realized why I always felt abandoned, why I didn't feel worthy, why I had lack with money, why I always needed constant attention from the person that I was with and for them to give me love because I couldn't give that to myself. And what's beautiful about the subconscious is that if you're able to rewire it and rewire those stories, they no longer have a hold on you. They don't control your life like they used to. And so that started happening to me, but I didn't realize that my nervous system just needed to catch up to everything that I was throwing at it. So it took me about a year to start even feeling better, to start feeling like myself again. I started doing some energy work with energy healers. I started getting Reiki done, which, funny story, my mom made me become a Reiki master at 18. And I hated it because it wasn't cool back then when I was 18. Okay, I'm 34 now. Like, it wasn't cool when I was 18. I never even told a soul when I was in high school that my mom had me doing this. And here I was, like, even though I shunned all these parts of myself and all the things that I had learned, here I was, like, searching and looking for, like, Reiki healers and energy healers to help me move this energy. Like, I felt it intuitively that it needed to be moved. And then fast forward, I break up with the other relationship, of course, but I learned a lot. I really saw, like, my inner child. He wasn't dating my adult self either. He was dating, like, the 7-year-old me. And we saw parts of each other that not a lot of people see in a relationship. And that was really intentional and loving that we were able to go there, but it was just not the relationship for us. And I knew one of my goals was like, okay, I need to have a healthy breakup here. Like, I need to have a healthy relationship with this person as I leave him, because I don't want to continue this toxic, like, pattern of everyone being mad at me, and, like, I can't set boundaries nicely, and I can't do things the right way, and I don't even know who I am. So I just end up, like, just starting this emotional storm so that I could leave. And so we made it a goal, even though it was messy, it was not easy. We made it a goal to stay friendly after our breakup. And there were some boundaries I had to set, and there were some things that I had to do, and some ways that I had to shift and change too. And looking back at all of that, I learned so much of myself. And every person, either in a romantic relationship or my sisters or my mother, or any relationship that I encountered, people, random people sometimes that I encountered, they were all such a blessing in my life because they gave me things that I needed in order to grow, in order to become the person that I am today. And I started piecing those things together. Instead of being the victim of my life, I started saying, like, okay, why did I see my dad die? Why did I see him go through this immense pain, apologizing to me on his deathbed? And I saw life different after that. I started seeing life as very short, as, like, we don't have enough time here to just play around and act like we don't care about things. We don't have enough time, because the time will come where we'll have a lot of regret. And so I started living my life, even subconsciously at the time, because I wasn't consciously doing this at 19, trying to live a life without regret. And I've just been filtering that out since. And being with my ex-husband, I realized, like, how little I loved myself and how much I needed someone else to love me. And so he taught me what self-love was. Being in the next relationship, he taught me to really look inwards and to have more grace for myself and more love for myself and more understanding for myself. He was very soft and nurturing in that sense. So he helped me even deepen the self-love for myself. And then I gave myself a few months, and I was alone. I went to a spiritual retreat. I did ayahuasca. I sat with plant medicine. I was not done messing with my nervous system yet, but even that was a beautiful experience, and the people I met and how in touch I got with myself and with my body, with who I want to really become, and my voice and my self-mastery and emotional mastery. And in between all of this, I started studying and getting answers because, like I said, I was in a rush to heal here. And what I've learned throughout all of this is that as women, especially as women, we all have emotions, but as women, we have to give ourselves the space to feel our emotions. We have to give ourselves the space to love ourselves, to understand ourselves. Our relationship to ourselves is the most powerful relationship we'll ever have. At the end of the day, when you're born and when you die alone. You were born alone. And everything in between is just beautiful stories and beautiful lessons. If you allow it to be the lessons, if you allow yourself to actually lean into the lessons. And that was another powerful message that I've received here in the last few years, is like, how can I shorten the gap between what happens to me and the lesson? Because there's a lesson in everything that happens, every interaction, every event, every challenge, every obstacle. We don't grow from happy-go-lucky days. That's when we strive and grow and to achieve goals and build momentum. But it's in the depths of our souls when we go through breakups, when we go through grief, when we go through painful events, when we are left alone to our senses, to our emotions, to our feelings, to our thoughts, that transformation happens if you allow it to, or you stay in the perpetual victimhood. And I know at the beginning of this video, I said I experienced a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression, and I did. And what I realized is that I felt anxious because I was out of control with my emotions. I didn't understand them. I just wanted to be reactive towards them. And so that created a lot of anxiety, because at any given moment, I was like, what's going to happen that's going to trigger me? What's going to happen that's going to create more trauma? And so I was in a super reactive state. And then the opposite would happen too, where I was super depressed because I was living in the past. I was living in my pain. I was living in all the parts of myself that I didn't really want to truly look at. My biggest message for you is in this video and in my story, I hope that you gain the power and the wisdom and the will, because it's just will. It really is. It's willpower to really look inside and ask yourself, What is in here? Because you are an incredible soul. You are the muse of your life. Everything's always happening for you. So what is really in here? What's in you? What can you better? Can we analyze the past? And that's the only time we look at the past, is to just find ways to make our future better. And can we let the future just unfold in such a beautiful, delicious way and truly be present with ourselves, be calm, be grounded, not be this like erupted volcano every time something happens? Can we learn to do these things? Yes, we can. We just need the tools to do it. And this is where I've become so passionate about this in my studying, in my own journey, and everything that I've learned that has helped me grow, and also in ways that I was like, you know what, I did too much. This is in the way. This is how I help mentor women, is that I know what works for each individual person, but also what's worked for me and what hasn't worked for me. And what worked for me and what hasn't worked for me is not going to be the same for you. That's why you're the muse of your life and your own source of inspiration. And so I'm creating this beautiful mastermind that's coming up this month for the muses that are ready to step into their whole power. I've created this whole framework on everything that I've gathered within my own research and helping and mentoring women within my own life. It's phases. That's what I realized. It all comes down to phases. As women, we go through different phases, not only in our cycle and her menstrual cycle, but just in our journey of life. And so my goal with this mastermind is to help you through these different phases, but it's a mastermind. And so what I'm doing is creating a beautiful community of women, because I also realize that as women, sometimes we don't have other women to help us, to cheer us on, to help us see a different perspective, to shift our minds, to shift our energies, to shift our emotions. How many times do we call a girlfriend, but she leaves us feeling even more anxious and more stressed and more pissed off? We don't have very positive people in our life unless we consciously look for these people. I've paid a lot of money to be in a lot of rooms so that I can involve myself with these people, so that I can be near these people. And in this mastermind, I'm going to have some of them come on here and join us. But not only will I just be leading us through these different phases as the year goes by, because it's starting in February, but it's going to be a beautiful year long, because I really want to create this supportive community. But women will be there alongside of you, working with you and helping you. And we're going to have a group chat where we check in with each other. We will be and become the muses of our world, but it takes practice. It takes us actually having intention in our day. It takes creating new habits, creating alignment, balancing our feminine, our masculine, having emotional mastery, understanding ourselves, rediscovering ourselves, breaking up with our limiting self-beliefs, understanding where those come from. What are our patterns? Where do we get stuck? These are all the things that we're going to talk about, and we're going to go through and grow through together in this evolution of this Muse Mastermind. So stay tuned. I'm going to have a lot more information for you here coming up. And thank you so much for listening to this. I hope that my story resonated with you. And I hope that in my story, you find pieces of yourself. Anytime I tell you stories, that I really want you to find pieces of yourself, because you're not alone. The most powerful thing I ever did in the very first inspirational podcast, or I think it was a YouTube video that I listened to, was Tony Robbins, and he talked about his life. And when I saw and heard his life, if you look back at Tony Robbins' life, he had a terrible childhood, and he grew up and has been doing extraordinary things. And I realized that if he could do it, I could do it. And so I'm here to show you, within my own story, within my own life, how you can go from anxiety, depression, or anything that you're feeling to the life that you really want, to alignment, to create healthy relationships, to feel in alignment with yourself, to create the business that you want, the career that you want, the love that you want, the healthy relationships that you want. Most importantly, a healthy relationship with yourself, to wake up every day and love yourself, to be so excited to live this life on earth, so that when your time comes, you're not having all these lists of regrets and shame and guilt and staying stuck in emotional patterns that don't serve you. So I love you, muses. Thank you so much for listening to this, and I will talk to you guys next week.